Again, just wanted to welcome you all on behalf of Bentley. I'm Chris Bradshaw, Chief Sustainability and Education Officer, and it is fabulous to have you here. Enjoy the session, and with that, Anish, here you go.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm just still gathering myself because it's been quite a day getting to and across London in the heat. So a little bit of grace, if that's all right, thank you. Welcome to this session today on accelerating implementation of resilient and adaptive transport infrastructure. This session is a result of a fantastic collaboration with ICSI that GCoM has. GCoM is the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. We are an alliance of city networks with 14,000 or thereabout signatory cities globally. And I'm a senior advisor on urban climate finance and inclusive action. I also co-chair the UNFCCC Informality Working Group under the Marrakesh Partnership. So very delighted to have our COP Presidency and Climate CC team here. And that, of course, what we're representing there, we're looking to empower people living and working in informality, which represents 1 billion of the population. And we've had some of the conditions here today. So, yeah, really great to be with you. Transport, as we know, is a system essential to the functioning of our cities, economies, and communities, and their resilience increasingly important in a changing climate. I kind of feel like we kind of know this today. I'm reading my notes, and we hadn't anticipated it was going to be close to 40, so rather ironic. And it's particularly fitting that we have this conversation in London. So many of the opportunities and challenges facing transport systems are shared by cities and metropolitan areas around the world. Today's discussion brings together perspectives from city government, transport authorities, engineering and infrastructure institutions, international organizations, finance, and the environmental community. And we're really pleased to be able to open with remarks from Samet Jilanci, coordinator of climate resilient cities under the COP31 presidency, Marcia Toledo, director of the Climate High-Level Champions, who's going to help set the scene from the perspectives of COP31 and the Global Climate Action Agenda. We'll then have a panel discussion moderated by Lucy Anderton, Director of Sustainability at UIC, and our panel brings together representatives from Greater London Authority, Transport for London, my fantastic colleague Bianca from C40, WWF US, and the Institution of Civil Engineers. And they're going to explore some of the questions facing the sector today, how to accelerate implementation, strengthen decision-making and investment, improve outcomes for communities, and build the capabilities needed for a changing climate. We'll conclude with a Q&A before reflecting on key messages as we look ahead to COP31. We've started a little bit later. We'll try and keep it to time, but feel free to carry on the conversation if you're able to and it's still going. We hope today's conversation is going to help connect experiences and perspectives from across sectors and geographies, contribute to the collective effort to build more resilient and adaptive transport systems. And so, to help set the scene for today's discussion and connect it to the broader resilience agenda leading into COP31, it's my pleasure to introduce Samet Jilanci, coordinator of climate resilient cities under the COP31 presidency. Samet.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, for organizing this great session. I mean, the transportation is quite important a lot. And over the past years, we all have experienced the heat wave affecting the London and many parts of Europe, and as well as Turkey. So it's a timely reminder that climate change is not a distant challenge. It's already affecting our daily lives, our economies, and infrastructure systems that we depend on. I mean, transport infrastructure is one of the foundations of economic development, social connectivity, and human well-being. So it connects people to job, healthcare, education, and economic opportunities. When transport infrastructure fails under climate stress, it's not simply an engineering challenge, it becomes a social and economic challenge that directly affects communities and livelihoods. So that's exactly why this conversation matters in London today. The challenge facing this city's transport network, aging assets, extreme weather, and the need to keep services running while retrofitting and adapting them at the same time are not unique to London. So they are shared by cities around the world, from rapidly urbanizing coastal cities to major metropolitan systems that were simply not built for the climate conditions they now face. And today's discussion on policy frameworks, risk-informed decision-making, and collaborative finance provides an important opportunity to identify practical solutions that can be replicated and scaled globally. So the COP31 presidency places strong emphasis on climate-resilient cities and infrastructure. And we believe that the resilience is no longer about responding to climate impacts after they occur. It's about anticipating risks, reducing vulnerabilities, and ensuring that investment made today remain functional and effective under future climate conditions. And situated at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Middle East, Turkey recognized the strategic importance of resilient connectivity. Through investments in highways, high-speed railways, ports, airports, and logistic corridors, we are working to strengthen regional connectivity while enhancing the resilience of our transport systems against climate-related risks. At the same time, we recognize that transport resilience cannot be considered in an isolation. You cannot build a climate-resilient city without climate-resilient mobility running through it. So just as you cannot plan resilient transport without considering the water systems it crosses, the energy that powers it, and the communities it's designed to serve. So these systems are interconnected. Increasingly, the cities that are managing climate risks most effectively are those breaking down traditional silos between transport planners, urban planners, infrastructure managers, and climate experts. So this reflects the broader vision of the COP31 action agenda. Today, the challenge before us is no longer identifying solutions. The challenge is implementation. So success will depend on our ability to strengthen partnerships, mobilize finance, accelerate practical actions that deliver tangible results for people and communities. As we move towards COP31 in Antalya, we look forward to working with all partners to advance resilient, sustainable, and connected infrastructure systems. So I invite all stakeholders to engage actively with the COP31 action agenda and help us turn ambition into implementation. I look forward to a rich discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Samit. And very quickly, I think I'm going to introduce you to Marcia for some reflections too.
Thank you, Asma. And very good to be here with all of you today. Before I start, a question. How many of you have heard, know, or work with the Global Climate Action Agenda? Honestly. Good, very good. How many of you are part of a coalition and initiative implementing solutions related to infrastructure, transport, or similar? Perfect. And how many of you are working with the private sector? Yeah, very good. Excellent. Now I see who is in the room. And that's actually the spirit of the Global Climate Action Agenda, which is what I want to double-click on the great inputs from Samet Jilanchi as the voice of the presidency. The Climate Champions team, which I am part of as Director of Resilience and Human Development, facilitates the Global Action Agenda that was brought in along with the Paris Agreement to actually help reflect the real economy contributions to climate action. So actors like businesses, investors, cities, regions, civil society, their contributions on climate action, their mobilization, but also the showcase of progress. And in this specific topic, in the action agenda, we have a special emphasis this year brought by the opportunity of COP31 presidency, a focus on climate resilience cities. And as part of that, a very important opportunity to elevate, showcase progress, and understand what are different actors contributing in regards of how do we scale. We have the solutions, we have the tools, we have the methods, we might have roadmaps and frameworks, but what is still preventing us to reach the scale that is needed? And so we're really keen to understand, to hear the voices, to also showcase the progress, especially of the private sector. And so in this case, that integration of not only, let's say, successful stories, but also what is the challenges, what is still preventing, how we are still not closing some of the gaps. And an excellent opportunity because, of course, the Global Action Agenda responds to the priorities of the global stocktake as part of the UNFCCC process, which means rallying to close those gaps of implementation. And as part of the Axis 4, I know you probably haven't heard this before, but I'm sharing that. The Action Agenda has 6 axes. Axis 4 deals with urban systems. And as Asma mentioned, it is really also the logic of bringing that system approach. Urban systems are not just one axis. It's probably very cross-cutting. It's relevant to energy, it's relevant to nature, it's relevant to finance mobilization, it's relevant to people. An agenda as well of inclusivity, diversity, and the opportunity, especially on looking from the lenses of transport, how we can better reflect those benefits in the economy, but benefits as well to people. So we're very keen to hear your inputs, your ideas, but especially welcoming if we can have your contributions to be elevated in the action agenda will be a very big win. We're really looking forward to especially look how solutions are being scaled and what innovations or collaboration among different stakeholders are helping to achieve that. So thank you for the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Marcia. So to explore these issues in greater depth, we're now going to move to our panel discussion, and I'm delighted to hand over to Lucy Anderton, Director of Sustainability at UIC, who's going to be joined by representatives from the Greater London Authority, Transport for London, C40, WWF US, and the Institution of Civil Engineers.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So if I could ask my panel maybe to join us on this little semicircle space, where we have quite a lot of time to have a nice conversation together. So I've got a couple of questions prepared, of course, that they already have seen. But I'm also going to be shortly after coming to the audience as well for questions or comments or stories you want to share or anything you want to share as part of that conversation as well. So please think about how you might want to contribute to this conversation. Sam's online as well. Great. So my name's, I say, Lucy Anderton, work for UIC. It's the International Union of Railways. We're really happy to support and work together on this session. We've been working particularly with ICSI on the action agenda that we've just heard a little bit about around resilience, but also a project on biodiversity called Symbiosis, which is a European-wide project all about integrating nature into our infrastructure, and particularly railway infrastructure. So that's touching on a few of the topics we're going to talk about today and deal into. So it's a great pleasure to have this rather fabulous panel here today. We're going to start sort of local, as we have to act global indeed. So we're going to, in our panel we have 2 Londoners as well. So we've got a couple of Londoners. Online we have Sam. You can hear us all right, Sam, I'm hoping?
Crystal clear, thank you.
Excellent. Sam Longman is Head of Sustainability and Corporate Environment at London for Transport. Of course, one of the closest people can't actually be here, unfortunately. So there you go. That's the irony of the kind of systems we have today. And of course, as well, Kristen Gida, who is Head of Strategy, Prevention and Community Resilience here at the Greater London Authority, the GLA. So our Londoners, so keeping a sort of a real focus on what's going on here in the city that we're so happily hosted today. And we also have Bianca, who's here with us, Bianca Macedo, who is Global Head for Clean Transport Finance at C40. So bringing that sort of city and international cooperation theme, but more importantly, the finance piece, which we're going to be talking a bit about today as well. And David, who's got a couple of hats today, haven't you, indeed? So you've got a day job in Northern Ireland where you're making sure that as Director of Engineering and Transformation at the Department for Infrastructure, making sure that infrastructure runs and is resilient in Northern Ireland. But also, of course, your second hat today is President of the ICE, the Institution of Civil Engineering. So that's sort of more institutional and engineering education profession piece as well. So looking around both those topics as well. And Anita, you're going to help us make sure we're talking about nature. So Anita Van Breda, she's Senior Director for WWUS, and really has that nature, but particularly in the disaster recovery and risk reduction space. So welcome panel, indeed. So I'm going to start with a question for us all to comment on, if that's all right. We've got a second mic. Yes, we do. Good. And we're going to, given the urgency that we're at, and I think that's quite clear today, the urgency that we're in, let's talk about how we can really accelerate action. So that's where we want to talk about how can we really speed things up. We know that things are moving, but they're a little bit slow. We're still hearing about pilots and small piece action. What are the sort of real opportunities do you see all as panel to really accelerate action, to really have more resilient, greater adaptive capacity within our transport systems in just the next few years?
Thanks very much, and it's really nice to be here. Good afternoon to everyone, and on behalf of London, or one of the people from London here, I can say sorry about the really high temperatures. But I think, and I'm here kind of as you said before, I'm here as strategy, prevention, and community resilience, and so I'm kind of here in a slightly different role, kind of trying to make sure that people remember the role of communities in all of this. And I think, so just a couple of things in terms of accelerating action. Number one, I think events like this emergency heat event that we're having now, that my unit within the GLA will be dealing with today, like on an emergency basis, will definitely, or hopefully, help to kind of focus minds a little bit on some of this stuff. It was previous heat waves and previous floods that have caused us to, kind of get into gear and try to come up with strategic responses to these things. I think, we can try to do that. We're going to be launching a London Heat Ready London plan later this week, tomorrow, I think. And I think, but this kind of, the disruption that we see from, situations and emergencies like this, I think can definitely help to focus minds. We just have to make sure that we use that properly. And that's probably, what I would say is just for now.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. As you say, I'm David Porter, and I'm the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. So, as you say, representing the professional body that is ICE. But maybe I'll answer this with my day job hat on, Chief Highway Engineer for Northern Ireland. And I would really impress the importance of maintenance of our assets. And often whenever we're talking about how we are going to deal with the future, we think about the new build. And I have a very good example, because in Northern Ireland, I was the person responsible for a very large road improvement scheme. And we had up to 400 people working on that scheme every day for a 4-year period. And during that period, we spent £250 million. And during that, because of all that effort, we added 15 kilometres to the road network. The road network in Northern Ireland is 25,000 kilometres. So sometimes there's a real focus in on the new and the big and the bright and the shiny, but actually the people and the communities we serve all rely on the local roads and the existing road network that we have out there. And so there's a real importance whenever we think about climate and the future changing climate and how life will become more challenging as we are dealing with these, to get back to the fundamentals, that we need to maintain what we have to a good standard, and that will make that resilient. And as part of that, there will be a process of renewals and we can then build in resilience into those renewals.
Thank you, and I want to thank the organizers for including WWF in this important conversation. So I work for a nature-based organization and often get questions, why are we involved with infrastructure and engineering? But it is a fundamental part of protecting nature and ensuring that nature is able to thrive into the future. We talked in the last panel about how important nature is to people and their survival. And I think a few things that we can do to accelerate a nature-positive infrastructure, at least for me, what I tell my environmental colleagues is go to places where you're not comfortable. Go to the conferences that the engineers have. Go to the conferences that the transportation people have and start talking to them and invite them to come to your spaces so that we're start breaking down these artificial silos and actually working together. And then I think that building on what my colleagues said, the second point I would add is find the champions and work with them. There's champions in your organizations, in your neighborhoods, in your sectors. Find them, work with them, and support them, because small seeds can often grow into big impact, and we shouldn't underestimate that possibility.
Oh, I completely agree with you, and I think I would just add that I think the biggest opportunity that we have in the next years is to work bi-directional, let's say, to try to integrate transport in the adaptation conversation and also the other way around, because these two worlds don't really connect in our organizations, national governments, cities. These are two split sectors that have their own agenda, and we need to do this bi-directional because if you want, for example, an adaptation plan to have transport specific actions, we need to make sure that the transport people will be able to implement it, for example. And also we should take advantage of the strengths of each of these sectors. So let's say transport. Transport has much more access to finance in general than adaptation. Transport projects in general have the opportunity to generate revenue, therefore they are easier to become bankable projects and attract more financing. So it is sometimes, from the finance perspective, easier to embed adaptation, resiliency into a transport project than the other way around. And on the adaptation side, adaptation interest on this sector is growing and growing. So we could also use this strength on adaptation to also embed transport in new projects that are arising.
So Sam, if we come to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I've been keeping a close eye on the trains. I live about an hour and a half outside London, and the trains have actually been fine. It's inside London there seems to be more problems, so certain irony there. Going last on this question gives me the opportunity to violently agree with everyone, but hopefully build. So I definitely agree with Kristen. It's those big events which are disruptive and costly and often sadly dangerous. It is important to use them as moments to learn and to get organisations to lift their heads up from the day to day. That, you know, the truth is, particularly with an organisation such as Transport for London, whilst we do think strategically and we plan strategically, 90% of our attention is literally what is happening that day in terms of our operations, and there's many things that goes into that. So that memory can quickly fade. So it's really important we recognise it as a journey of maturity, because weather, let alone extreme events and climate change, is an external factor which impacts our operations, it impacts productivity, safety, asset degradation, and is already showing up on our balance sheets. We just don't see it. So if we can go through that continual cycle of maturity, improving data, improving monitoring systems to start to draw that out, then you can start to inform decision making. To agree with David, I think delivering as part of BAU is key. You know, this isn't, whilst there is a big retrofit exercise that's required, if we can deliver it as part of projects and programs, it's often much cheaper and in the long term, more cost effective. If you are not building in resilience, you are building in vulnerability, which again will cost you more in the future. And I think Anita was saying something along the lines of getting people to go out and see these solutions. And I'm a big believer of that. If people go to experience this stuff, particularly those nature-based solutions, they'll enjoy it and they'll want to do more of it. If something feels positive, you can build momentum. So I think that's really important as well. To set it in a kind of positive mindset. Yes, there are risks and there is a burden that we're trying to deal with. But if we just think of it as dealing with that burden, it's very deflating. It's like all we're trying to do is get back to how it was before, where actually the way you adapt, particularly things like nature-based solutions and some of the co-benefits about how we improve our homes and our infrastructure, will deliver all those co-benefits. And actually we're racing towards a nature-rich, climate-aligned, equitable health and safe and healthy future. And then finishing with Bianca, part of everyone's role. This is really important, and it's a journey we've seen with safety. Safety, a couple of decades ago was done by people in tabards carrying clipboards, going around telling people things were unsafe. Now, in organisations such as TfL and pretty much any organisation with big assets and operations, safety is very clearly understood as part of everyone's role, and everyone sits up and listens when you say, I think there's something we should be concerned about with safety or an opportunity with safety. And that's what we need to do with adaptation and broader sustainability, really. It should be moved out of the role of environment and sustainability teams into the finance teams, into the engineering, into the asset operations, into the project and programme managers. Because it's essentially about managing risks and benefits. Thank you.
Yeah. No, so it's something about building on learning from some of those emergencies and urgencies that we see, building momentum, and sort of building maturity and learning from these things, right? So, and something around breaking down these barriers, more integrated, coherent plans where your programs and your policies are much more integrated instead of having a separate idea around resilience than infrastructure, than nature, right, and finance. So, and so, as you say, making it everybody's job. It's a bit, we're on a journey, but we need to sort of accelerate a little bit, but we can do that by integrating it a little bit more. If I can stick with you, Sam, if that's all right, to talk a little bit more about how we do that. So how do we operationalize? How do we make this part of everyone's job? How do we make this part of everyday decision-making, everyday asset management, everyday, actually, long-term investment planning as well? So, and perhaps, David, you could build on that following Sam's comments.
Thank you. I mean, for me, top line is like anything, really. This is about driving change, and it's about hearts and minds. I think it's actually quite easy to get people engaged on this agenda, even more so now, and the need to take action, and them come out of that discussion or that training or whatever it is, being highly motivated. But then they need to know exactly what they have to do when they turn around to the day job. Do they have the tools? Do they have the capability? Do they have the data to actually take the right decisions and produce the right designs and solutions? And it's trying to drive that culture change again to this being a collective challenge, that it's not the sustainability or environment team that are going to design that for people. Everyone is responsible for figuring out these solutions, improving our approach to risk management, information management, how we design things, what the solutions are, systems and processes, our management system. It's a huge change journey that we're on, and a journey of maturity, which has already been talked about. And the key thing is to not become overwhelmed, because with the adaptation agenda, you can see lots of frameworks and lots of plans, and there will be hundreds, often, actions in there, and it can be overwhelming. Where do I start? There's just so much to do. And my advice and the way I approach it is just get stuck in. Just start somewhere and build up from there. And don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. A rough number now, which informs decision making, is infinitely better than a perfect number that you never have. So if you think of it in terms of that continual cycle of improvement, rather than an exercise, we're all just going to sit down and figure this out, come up with a plan and implement the plan, and then we're adapted. We are, like sustainability generally, there is no end goal. It's about a mindset and a framework in which you make decisions and where you think about what you're trying to achieve, and a direction of travel that you are continually working at.
So two things have struck me out of the conversation so far. Is one, the comment you made about we're on a journey, and I want to build on that a little bit. And the other one was about how you need to be challenged by other voices in the room, maybe not necessarily engineers, but other professions or other disciplines. So those are two crucial things that we're doing within the department and within the industry at the minute, where one, we're telling people, recognize we're on a journey, to count carbon, to recognise that we're on this net zero journey, to recognise that infrastructure is a big contributor to emissions, to recognise that we need to, as engineers, find solutions that society finds acceptable. And part of that is explaining that we're on a journey, that we're not going to get there in one jump, that we need to bring people along with us. And that's particularly important in the transport network. I often joked in Northern Ireland, whenever the first legislation came in, I said at one meeting, I could decarbonise the motorway network overnight. And everybody stopped and looked. How would you do that? Well, I will just arrange for a lorry load of stones to be tipped on the end of it, and you can't use it anymore. And that network is decarbonised in an instant. However, society would take a negative reaction to that. And you know, I was being provocative for a reason, to make people think about, yeah, it's okay coming up with a solution, but what you actually need is a solution that society will find acceptable, and recognising that we're on a journey and we need to bring the profession along with us. We need to be challenged by other professions and other people and other voices. But most importantly, we need to make sure that we are coming up with solutions that society will find acceptable, so that they will move with us and move on this journey.
Right, yeah. So we're talking about hearts and minds, big culture change, not an easy task, not a quick task. But is there a culture change, Anita, in terms of understanding nature and what nature can do in this? Because for a long time, engineers have not been talking about nature at all, have they, right? So maybe talk to a little bit about where nature can, and nature-based solutions can really make a big difference in building more resilient transport systems in particular.
Yeah, I think nature is fundamental to resilience, generally speaking, for people and for infrastructure. So being able to think like a watershed and look upstream and downstream of where your transportation infrastructure is going and what risk are you facing in that context, but then also looking at nature as a tool to help for infrastructure to be resilient. So nature just isn't a threat to infrastructure, but it can actually support infrastructure. And so within WWF, we do some work on a hybrid green-gray infrastructure, weaving natural infrastructure into transportation planning, recognizing that you can get multiple co-benefits from including nature in transportation systems. The work that my team focuses on is specifically on disasters and recovery, reconstruction to disasters, and weaving nature into that. And there we see from unfortunate events, there are opportunities to do things differently and to advocate for building back in a way that's not building back that same vulnerability that existed before the extreme event, but what can we build back that is safer, and that often means safer and greener. So being able to engage in that dialogue and in that space to help disaster reconstruction, transportation reconstruction, consider a different type of future that's adaptive to a changing climate, but that's also working with nature instead of against it to support benefits for both people and nature. It's slow, but it's growing, and by working with engineers and academic institutions and financiers on this issue, we are starting to see progress in that space, but there's a lot more to do to accelerate that progress.
Thank you. Bianca, let's talk about cities. I mean, cities have got a big job here. I mean, the job that you have here in London to sort of manage this is huge. So how is C40 sort of or an international sort of cooperation and learning across cities helping in this space to sort of really build knowledge and, around this topic?
So C40 and GCoM, we help cities implementing climate action. So in this specific sector, transport resilience, we do a lot of different types of support. So, for example, we provide cities with knowledge on this context and also peer-to-peer moments so that they can share experience between themselves on how each city is integrating resilience in the transport project. And we have really good cases. I brought 2 of those here and I will share with you. Also, we can support cities on developing minimum standards for new projects so that these projects comply with minimum criteria for it to be resilient, because this knowledge is still not well across all the cities and all the national governments as well. So we don't even know what is transport resilience and how we can make a transport project resilient. So these minimum standards for each transport project type are really essential so that we can start working on what is the taxonomy for transport resilience, right? Also, we do support cities implementing pilots. We also support cities on technical assistance for advancing their projects. And on the financing side, we do support matchmaking cities projects with the financiers so that they reach implementation stage. But I also like to mention the role of national governments and the multi-level governance here. In Global South, most of the public transport projects do not stand by themselves. They will need national government support, especially after the pandemic. Our demand levels never returned to the demand that we had before. And that's not only because of the pandemic, but we're losing ridership to ride-hailing services and to motorbikes, especially in Latin America and Africa. So we cannot ensure an efficient and high-quality service in the Global South cities without collaboration with national governments. So we need to have this discussion, and we need to embed resilience in this discussion as well. And finally, on this integration with the national adaptation plans, it is really important that cities can have their voices represented there, but also the other way around. We need to have resilience embedded into the mitigation plans and also in the transport and mobility plans, even in the city levels, so that this can be done bi-directional as well.
Great, thank you. So, Kirsten, if we could perhaps talk a little bit more about people. We talked about how we can build back better and greener, more resilient, safer, and thinking city level and national policy level. But what about the community level? How can we sort of bring that sort of value to local people?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's kind of what we try to think about all the time, really. And I think there are a few different areas for thinking about this. I mean, number one is kind of, thinking about transport and resilience or lack of resilience. And there needs to be some thinking about, how does disruption to infrastructure, for example, affect different communities differently, understanding, where there might be particular reliance on, for example, buses and things like that. Just having that understanding about what you're talking about in terms of, the needs of different communities in all of this. I was also thinking about, when people are talking about incorporation of green infrastructure, for example, and greening into various projects. I mean, what you're talking about here is often about, how a place ends up looking, where, you're providing these kinds of benefits and co-benefits that we talk about for communities, but we do need to think about involving those communities that we're trying to benefit in the actual design and implementation of some of that, because otherwise you end up with, potential green spaces that are really nice, but they need to be appealing, and they need to be, people need to feel that they're safe, culturally appropriate, and so forth. And so there needs to be kind of that understanding. In the resilience unit, in my area of the resilience unit, we work a lot with communities. We have networks of hundreds and hundreds of organizations, all with their own networks, that are interested in, resilience, that are thinking about this from, all sorts of different perspectives. They're not necessarily concerned about adaptation or climate change, but they're there, and they're really, really, active in their own community spaces, and they also are a terrific network. So we're also really happy to work with colleagues and partners across different sectors to, to try to join that up a little bit and try to make sure that, why not have, transport conversations about, about greening communities or about doing other things, or greening areas or doing other things, involve the communities in those conversations. Communities are also having conversations about their own areas and about, for example, about risks and about adaptation. We've had, sort of heat wave exercises previously with our communities. Why couldn't transport representatives come along to that and actually hear what it is the communities are really interested in? So there are a few ways that we can be thinking about that. But I think, it's just about trying to understand, and I really like what Anita said earlier about, getting into spaces where you're not necessarily comfortable, because I think that's absolutely true. I think a lot of people tend to feel like communities, or some of them, can be hard to reach, but we really reject that framing because it's actually, we're not necessarily making the effort because we don't feel like taking the time, or we don't feel like, we might feel a bit afraid, we might be afraid of rejection or whatever, but that, making those partnerships can be really, really fruitful and can make sure that you actually realize those co-benefits that you're talking about and not just talk about them.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to open it up now. I've got a couple more questions in my pocket, but I'll see if at this point, if there's any of the audience would like to ask a question. Yeah.
Thank you. I feel a bit exposed with the half of the front row leaving. But my name's Rafe Smith. I'm a freelance consultant. I've worked with communities to corporates. My question today is about how can we measure resilience so we can enable society to hold government and asset providers accountable, and also for finance to be able to identify the value added. The reason I ask, I don't know if you've seen that today the annual decarbonisation report's been published. We know from a mitigation side that emissions for transport have shot up by 2.7%, and in fact last year's drop was also an increase. So we've got an easy way to measure it. But if you look at resilience, I mean, the Environment Agency published new data last year showing that big increase, half of roads and railways would be flooded regularly by 2050. The problem is that was based on a 2018 climate model, so it was out of date even before that report was modelled. This week we're seeing temperatures that again exceed models, so talking about a 1 in 100 or a 1 in 1,000 year event is meaningless. What can we do to judge resilience so that money flows to that, and including in particular, improving existing network rather than big new shiny schemes? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's certain assets that we can determine the resilience of it, so we can determine the standard of protection, the flood defence, and so that's one metric. But you're right, the future is not like the past, and we are in a very, very a quicker moving situation than we have ever thought that we were going to be in, and so we are, quite frankly, scrambling in some areas to try and work out where actually are the vulnerabilities. One of the big challenges that we had at the early stage of trying to work out the vulnerabilities were we were talking about a future risk. We were talking about a modelled future that was a bit theoretical. And so whenever we went to decision makers and said, look, here's what the future might look like, they were going, yeah, but look at all the problems we have today. Look at the cost of living, look at this pressure, look at the pressure on finances, look at the pressure on resources. And so the points made about don't miss the opportunity of the events that we are facing today to say the future is going to be different and we need to be sitting up and take this seriously. So I don't have a perfect answer in terms of how we can actually work out the standard of protection or the resilience, but we do need to use the events to really bring a focus to say we ain't kidding here whenever we say that we are or there's a genuine risk to the infrastructure that society relies on each and every day, that it might not be providing the service on some days, and that will have a ripple effect, not just in terms of the economy, but across every individual and the way that they run their lives. And that's something that we need to take very, very seriously.
Well, I'm no expert on adaptation. I am a transport engineer. And I don't know all the metrics, but I just wanted to give one example. There is this one project in Kuala Lumpur where it's called SMART, Stormwater Management and Road Tunnel. So basically, it is a tunnel that also provides stormwater diversion into strong rainfalls. So basically, its primary role is to provide drainage to the system when there's huge rains. And when it's not being used to support with flooding, it also can be a tunnel where they have a toll, and that was used to generate revenue to the project. But what I want to share is the metric that they've used. The project was implemented in 2007, and so far it has been credited for preventing 40 floods with an estimated avoidance of public damage losses of 340 million USD. So this can be one of the measures regarding flooding, but yeah, happy to hear the others.
And Sam, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't know if you can see my hand, so I did a real hand as well. Excellent. I think one of the issues with the sustainability agenda, and not just environmental sustainability, but broader sustainability, is net zero. I think because that's what most people think of when you say sustainability or environment. There's a real sense that there's this goal that we just need to achieve, and once you've achieved that goal, everything's sorted and it's measurable. That is somewhat unique to carbon emissions, and the truth is, for most sustainability outcomes, social, economic, or environmental, there will be no single measure, and particularly with adaptation and resilience, because it's so complex in terms of the hazards, the exposure, and the vulnerability. That's why I don't think we should wait, and there are tools that can be used, and there is data and there's models that can be used, but it's about what is your scope and agency in terms of your operations or organization. What are your biggest risks and opportunities, and where are you going to start to build some real insight that will start to give you numbers? And the way I always think about this is right at the top. When we think about sustainability, what are we ultimately trying to achieve? And I believe it's the improvement in health and well-being, in an equitable way. And then you can go to the next ring of outcomes. Well, we need a healthy environment. We need diverse and rich and healthy nature in order to sustain that. We need good economic activity where everyone can prosper. We need fairness and equity. So there's all these outcomes that you start to achieve. And then you can go in again to, well, my organization, what are the outcomes I try to achieve that contribute towards that? Well, it's transport, it's access to good homes and jobs, it's about a transport system that's sustainable and healthy and nature aligned and is fair and is safe. And then bring it back in even further into organization. What are the things that do I really measure in the day to day? Well, it's things like in passenger journeys, revenue, in safety incidents, environmental incidents, operational delivery. It's just trying to see that golden thread right from that day-to-day decision that you're making to that ultimate outcome of health and well-being, recognizing there's no perfect answer. It's always going to be complex, and it's just about a mindset and a direction of travel that we keep working at and keep working towards.
Thank you. Well, so
Can I add to that? Yeah, just real quickly, I think that's a really interesting question. We have internal debates in WWF all the time about how do you measure resilience, and I think we come to the conclusion that you really can't. There might be some proxy indicators that you can put in to try to capture some of that resilience input. But I think it's also important for all of us in the sectors that we work in, the projects that we work on, to be clear about the definitions of terms that we're using. We use the word, resilience all the time. At least we see it in our sector all the time. And we use it in a way that suggests that resilience is a good thing. But resilience can also be a bad thing. There are bad systems that are resilient. And so we try to encourage all of our work and our partners to be real clear about 4 questions when it comes to resilience. Resilience of what? Resilience to what? Resilience through what? And resilience for whom? So that you're really articulating what your objective is around your resilient infrastructure or your transportation to help you gauge whether or not your system is resilient.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a little bit of like, oh, do you want to know about resilience, which might be how quickly after the sort of events of this week are we going to get back, and can you get back better, or are you know how quickly, and what's the delta between a good day and a bad day, and you know can we make sure it's not getting a bigger gap between a good day and a bad day? But then when we talk about adaptation, we're talking about when we talk about health and well-being, it's a much bigger situation, right? It's a more of a journey, and more of a maturity, more of a thing that we should be benchmarking about. And there's too many facts in there, so perhaps there's two different things here. I saw there was another question. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Edwin Lau with the Blue Dot Network, which is a global certification of quality infrastructure. And I really like Bianca's point about thinking creatively about this interface or intersection between transportation and resilience, because we really need to get creative in order to get the resources that are necessary for cities to be able to make these adaptation investments. One of the first projects that we certified was the Eurasia Tunnel, which goes under the Bosphorus. It's a 4.6-kilometer tunnel. This was built in 2012, even before resilience was really a buzzword. But because of the geographic location, they had to think about seismic risk and tsunamis. And so many of the characteristics that were necessary to avoid failure were already built in. And so I think one of the ways to think about resilience or metrics is the cost of failure of infrastructure. And so the Eurasia Tunnel, they have an estimated 4.1 billion in productivity savings. So if you think about what would happen if that tunnel were to shut down, both for the productivity of the city, but also for the national economy. And so when you look at global cities like London or Paris, the cost to the national economy of infrastructure failure is huge. And last week, the IFC and AXA Climate published a report which said that $1 in adaptation investments could lead up to $8.6 in benefits. So this, I think, is the kind of thinking that we need in order to bring finance to the table to make these necessary adaptations. Thank you.
Thank you. Juan Sebastián Cañaver Herrera. I'm a CHT champion on climate resilience. So for me, in general, resilience can be defined as the simultaneous management of risk, which is, I think, where most engineers tend to focus and most people tend to focus. But it's also the management of change. And I think some of you already kind of touched upon that. And I think that's the most difficult part. We haven't figured out how to deal change or start change in people's minds. So my question was, what has been an effective tool or effective way of changing the minds and hearts of people that you have to talk to in your job? And how can you suggest us to be more influential?
Sam, do you want to go for that?
Yeah, for me, the most effective thing has been show, not tell. When I joined TfL, it's 13 years ago now, I forget how long, even climate change wasn't really on the agenda in any great way, let alone adaptation. And there was definitely this view that it wasn't going to be a problem because hot countries cope, so we would cope. And we then commissioned a PhD student from Brunel University to use our own data to look at the correlation between the performance of the tube network and just ambient temperature. And that was the first time it showed that there was this correlation that as the temperatures went up or they became too cold, assets would start to fail, and it was statistically significant. So our asset managers could then see, oh, actually, I should care about this external factor and I should do something about it. So I'm always looking to either deliver a project or help deliver a project and then show people the benefits, show it working. And an example I always point back to is not actually to do with adaptation, but it is the London congestion charge, where before the London congestion charge came in, this was the original congestion charge in central London, significant public opposition. The day after the congestion charge went in, People went out into the streets and they saw there were less cars, the air was cleaner, the roads were quieter, it felt safer. Public support shot up. So it's if you build it, they will come. And if it feels good, people want to do more of it.
The other thing that I would suggest is that you think about the way that you're communicating risk. Not everybody understands the word risk, and not everybody understands the information that we're providing in the same way. I'll give you an example. For many years, we've had a flood map of Belfast, which shows the flood outline and shows that the centre of Belfast is at significant flood risk. That has been published, available on government websites, and nobody batted an eyelid about it. We then developed a digital twin of Belfast, and the people that were developing that digital twin came to me and said, we can now produce animations, and we can show how flood events develop. And so I said, that sounds very interesting, let me see that. And you could see how the flood, not just this static picture, not just this big blue blob, but how the water develops over a period of time. And I said, that looks like a useful tool. Let's share that with a few people. And boy, did we get a reaction. It showed exactly the same information. It showed the same outline. The flood event extent hadn't changed. The return period hadn't changed. The depth of flooding hadn't changed. But the way that we were communicating that risk resonated with people. They could understand what it meant, not just in theory, but they could imagine the water coming down some of those streets. They knew what was on those streets, and they could imagine if, as the water develops down that, it's going to impact on this service, and it's going to cause that. So I would encourage just to think about the way you're communicating that risk. If it's not landing, if you're not getting a response, maybe you need to change your communication method. Maybe you need to think about how the listener is understanding what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, I think I would probably just echo that and say that, we talk about the definition of resilience. What does it mean to you? I mean, it's very context specific. And I think in general, you really do have to know what is the interest or the goal or the prerogative of the person that you're actually talking to in that particular situation. And I would say that, there's an awful lot of conversation that happens around the cost of adaptation or the cost of inaction or creating that business case and creating that evidence. I've yet to see a really good case of where that financial business case is making a huge difference to a lot of decision makers. And I know we always say, oh, it'll definitely make a difference if we just tell people, what it's going to cost. But I've definitely had a lot of people come to me and say, well, yeah, I was just told that in my borough it's going to cost this much, and it doesn't really mean anything to me. So just be cautious about that. But I think if we can actually define, and it goes back to that question of metrics as well. What is the goal? Like, what is it you're actually trying to achieve? And then, what is it you're trying to adapt? And then you can start to have that conversation.
Okay, one final question.
All right. So Chris Bradshaw with Bentley. So I'm curious, right, for today, we have we have a number of people who aren't taking trains today because they were asked not to, or, right? So I'm wondering, Sam, if, for example, you guys will compute revenue lost today because it was 38 degrees F and understand what the revenue, and then I'm also wondering if anyone will look at how much delay was there for society? What was the cost to people in terms of time because of delayed trains, et cetera, to try to, again, get to this point about quantification, because one aspect of resiliency is business continuity or service continuity, right? It's not the only, again, depends how you define resilience, but I'm just curious if these kinds of opportunities can help inform management, to your point, about either lost revenue or lost time.
I think that was for you, Sam, if you want to start.
Yeah, that's an excellent question and right up my street. Yeah, so I didn't travel because of the warnings and the advice not to travel. And then, as I say, the train seemed fine, but in London it seems we're falling over a bit in places. That question goes to the heart of where I'm focusing my attention. You'll see in a well-adapted UK that's recently been published and lots of evidence and literature about the huge benefit cost ratios you get from adaptation, 10 to 1, 30 to 1 for some of them. but most of that is often the benefits to wider society, and so they're dispersed and harder to capture. So in a cash-constrained organisation, which most of us are, and certainly Transport for London is, I'm really trying to focus on the financial case. And I do understand the point that Kristen was making, that it doesn't always move the dial. But if you can really make it very specific to things that organisation already cares about, it does move the dial. That's my experience. And so exactly what you've said is one of the things we're trying to do. At the moment, we will constantly measure our journey numbers, journey time reliability, revenue on a daily, hourly basis, but we don't yet have that translation layer to correlate and attribute it to what the weather did. We will do things like make calculations on an ad hoc basis that there was a heat wave or there's a flood event and our revenue went down. But that is not part of the course. Like, we should have dashboards in front of us on a daily basis where we see those numbers. Once you have that, I think you'll really start to ingrain and embed them in the mindset and start to really drive decision making. That does require updating and improving and amending your tools and your management systems and your monitoring, which is complex, particularly in an organisation like TfL with lots of historic systems and security challenges. But that is the journey we're on, and why you need everyone in your organisation to help you on that journey, because so many people are going to be involved. And actually, for the London Climate Ready Partnership, of which I'm the Deputy Chair, in March we published a climate cost getting started guide, precisely to try and help organisations go on that journey, but also using language that was accessible to as wide a number of roles as possible. So it isn't just for those climate nerds and people that already understand it. Anyone can pick it up, get it, and start to roll up their sleeves and help.
One thing I would say, that whatever number we come up with, it's in all likelihood it's too low, because we are, as a society, we are utterly reliant on our infrastructure, whether it's the transport network, whether it's the public water supply, whether it's the electricity network. We are utterly reliant on it. It's almost got to the point of, it's like trying to explain to somebody what is the value of air to a human being. You can't really put a figure on that because we don't exist without it. Well, that's the situation we've got to in the developed worlds. We literally cannot exist without the infrastructure. So yes, we will be able to calculate a figure because of the disruption, but the non-monetary impacts are huge. The impacts on society, the impacts on loneliness, the impacts on missed appointments for hospitals, the impacts on right across social society. So my appeal to the politicians and those that are in positions of authority, take this serious. We need to really be thinking about the resilience of our infrastructure.
Thank you. All right, so just to finish up the panel, perhaps just one last question from me, a couple of minutes for you, from each of you, I think. This London Climate Action Week is one of the sort of points throughout the year as we work towards COP31. We've already heard from the Presidency, and that transport will be, and resilience will be certainly part of the agenda. Some of the people in the room, including myself, will be there. What message should we be taking to the people with the money and the power if they're there and listening? So perhaps just some final closing thoughts about the kind of single message you would be giving to policymakers, to investors in this space.
Well, I guess I would say that the cost of inaction will be much larger. If we don't act now, we will spend much more than really integrating now resilience into existing transport projects and also future transport projects. And I would also say that we should start also integrating transport and adaptation teams today, tomorrow, because this is all very urgent.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would just add that one message I would send is that there's opportunity. There's a lot of stress and anxiety and pain all around the world at the moment, but there's also opportunity if we take it. And so we can create a different future for transportation, for people and nature in the future, and we should take that opportunity and take advantage of it. Nature provides services to people that we need, and we know how to build infrastructure and transportation that is different from the past, so we should move into the future with some optimism and put it to work.
To answer this, I'm going to put on my ICE president hat, and the message I would take to decision makers in particular is that the profession is ready there and equipped to help, and not just narrow that down to civil engineers. I think lots of professions would be saying that same thing. We are ready to help and to address the real challenges. What we need is that informed decision making. What we need is that leadership, that political leadership. What we need is the decision makers to really understand the trade-offs, to understand the importance of this and also the urgency of it, and then we're ready to help and try and address some of this.
Yeah, I think almost everything that you said only replace engineers with communities, really. I think that, people out there, if you're ready to connect this up in a way that kind of really breaks down silos and talks to what people are really interested in and the things that they're actually concerned about in terms of risk and what they want their places to look like and how they want to feel safe and things like that, and it's really doable, then you're pushing in an open door and people will be really keen to get on board with this. But also you have to fund it. And I don't mean finance, I mean fund it.
Sam.
They're all great messages. I'll add one that's slightly different, that decarbonisation and adaptation and just sustainability generally are all the same thing. It's all about who's making decisions, how decisions are made, on what values, what data, what evidence, and what we're ultimately trying to achieve. But particularly when it comes to decarbonisation and adaptation, there's still too much in silos, and we need to drive home the message that the climate has changed and will continue to change, and unless we adapt and improve resilience, we'll put decarbonisation at risk because we won't be coping. But I would like to frame it in some of the positivity that the panel have already conveyed. I think the more you can make this a positive and hopeful and enjoyable endeavour, the more likely we are to build momentum.
I like to end with optimism and a positive note. That's super nice. It can be super depressing talking about this sometimes, can't it? So it's really exciting to hear this optimism that we want to get stuck in, I think you said, Sam, and really everyone's ready and eager, and there's lots of clear messaging coming towards our leadership and hopefully really good discussions at COP31 going forward. So a big round of applause for my wonderful panel, please. Thank you, Kristen, David, Anita, Bianca, and Sam. And we're just a few minutes to close. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you again to Lucy and to our speakers, panelists, and of course for the questions and a really insightful discussion. I think something that ICSI does really, really well is bring these multi-stakeholder conversations together that don't often happen. And to your point, Anita, being in the rooms that you're not comfortable being in and having those discussions and finding the synergies and the good practice, but also kind of convening around the challenges. From my GCoM city perspective, tomorrow the Climate Policy Initiative are launching the 2026 State of Cities Climate Finance Report. I think it is cities, or anyway, global climate finance at least, which, Bianca, will probably be a very low, very conservative number. The last time they did that, I think the projection was that we need 4.5 trillion annually through to 2050 to meet the needs of the infrastructure that's going to be required based on the projections that actually much of the infrastructure that's going to be needed, even in sub-Saharan Africa, is yet to be built. And there's a real opportunity there to kind of learn from lessons elsewhere, to integrate nature, to think about adaptation and resilience, looking at the tweaks and the technological opportunities, but looking at kind of the systems-wide holistic resilient opportunities as well. And I think for me, what's really stood out, I've gone back to pencil today. So not only has the transport system broken down, but my laptop's not playing as well. So gone back to pencil. But, we talked about metrics, looking at the cost of inaction, looking at typologies, and going back to risk and vulnerability assessments. Communication, particularly in terms of public buy-in, is particularly important. Understanding, Kristen mentioned, understanding the needs of different communities and why. On Monday, I was at EBRD, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, that's it. Green Cities Day, they were celebrating their 10 years of their green cities. And their director of climate, Gianpiero Nacci, was saying we should be looking at this as service provision. Resilience and adaptation should be incorporated into portfolios and programs of work. They don't have a return on investment, but actually they need to be integrated, and we should be looking at this as service provision, even from a banking perspective, which I thought was real progress actually from that side. So that was really useful to hear as well. David talked about maintenance of assets in terms of adaptation, and Sam, what I particularly like, Bianca, I like the bi-direction, but Sam, I particularly like a good proverb. So your don't let perfection be an enemy of the good. I think that's probably where we want to close this session. So thank you very much, everybody. I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too. Thank you.